Major spoiler alert. This review assumes that you have either watched or played Last of Us Part 2. If you haven't, I do suggest that you do so. If you don't care, please continue watching. All gameplay clips that you see in this video were taken from my Twitch, twitch.tv/casualkermit. I streamed the entire game, so if you want to see someone play the game, I suggest you can do it there. Have fun watching. Last of Us 2, a game that players waited 7 years for, but was fairly unnecessary. The first Last of Us was fairly close and shut, with some hanging questions left, as any game should, to keep the people thinking, like what happened to the Fireflies. The second game doesn't even compare to the first. It's true. We all know it. Anyone who's played it, you can realize that. The characters and connections that are in the first game, the love that it was given, are almost not even existent in the new game. Last of Us 2 has a disappointing and generic revenge is bad plot. It is pretty much the same story told in many other games. I'm not saying that revenge plots are bad, they can be very good when done right. The problem comes when developers try and follow a masterpiece of a story that was the original Last of Us with a revenge plot. And there lies my biggest problem. I think that The Last of Us 2's plot could have been very good if it was just in a different game, and not a sequel. The game wants us to sympathize with both Ellie and Abby so that we are satisfied with the end, where they go their separate ways. But most players, especially if they played the first game, are going to feel a much stronger bond with Ellie and want revenge on Abby. I think the story could have been much better if they just stuck with revenge instead of revenge is bad. After Joel's death, I wanted revenge. He was a character I had played as and watched grow for hours in the first game. So once you saw the direction the story was going, where Ellie will eventually give up on revenge, it gives the player the disappointment that they won't get a satisfying conclusion. The story almost feels like it was made for something else and then shoved into the Last of Us universe. And that just makes me sad. Joel's death was actually surprisingly one of my favorite things in the game. It made sense. There had to be consequences for what Joel had done in the hospital. Though, I don't like that the main reason Abby killed Joel is that he killed a random NPC who happened to be her father. I think that Abby should be angry that Joel pretty much single-handedly destroyed the Fireflies. My second problem with Joel's death is that it came at the wrong time. When his death came, the player had barely seen him at all. He was only talked about a small amount at the beginning of the game. His death would have hit much more if the birthday and hotel flashbacks with Ellie happened at the beginning of the game. It would have reinforced the Ellie and Joel bond and driven the player to want revenge as much as Ellie, even if they didn't play the first game. The first Last of Us didn't rely on its combat, scares, or exploration to make it a great game. It relied on its characters and their development. In the second game, that idea is almost thrown out the window. Many characters get little to no development or traits and then are shot in the face. Like Jesse. He pops up around midway through Ellie's part of the game, but he's barely ever used. Most of the time he is there, Ellie tells him to stay with Dina or just leaves him without even saying that she's going anywhere. This makes it so you don't really care about him when Abby just pops him in the face. That brings up another topic. Characters will just die in the dumbest ways, no setup or anything, and it just feels a little off. Like Manny, they're talking and then boom, Tommy shoots them, and Abby doesn't even skip a beat. She just keeps on going. I know it's supposed to make the player feel shocked and unknowing of what will happen next, but it really just comes off as lazy. Like the developers didn't have the time or care to make meaningful deaths for these characters. Another character who almost gets no development is Dina. Her character is pretty much summed up to, she makes jokes, she is pregnant. They could have done a lot more with her, and she could have been the reason that Ellie has so much strength to keep mauling through all these enemies. Ellie's character is probably the highlight of the game for me. As the player, we see her try to be like Joel and get revenge for Joel. And she struggles at this. As Ellie does more and more gruesome things, it shows that Joel gave her a light and saved her so that she wouldn't have to be like him, torturing and killing in order to survive. It is very apparent from gameplay to cutscenes that Ellie is very different from Joel. When she tortures Nora for Abby's location, it takes a very large toll on her mental state, when that is the same thing we see Joel do multiple times, without skipping a beat. I love this because it's not something we ever saw in the first game. We were left to assume that Joel came to terms with the horrible things he had to do after many years of smuggling. Ellie's character almost saves the story for me, and she makes the ending very believable. Ellie doesn't have the ruthlessness that Joel does, and she can't bring herself to end Abby, especially after seeing the injured Lev. Yara and Lev are definitely the most interesting additions to the cast of characters. They give an amazing insight into this new group, the Seraphites, with their mysterious culture, and I really like it. It dives into an aspect of post-apocalyptic games that don't really get deeply described a lot. You know, people making up their own religions or communities to survive, but their communities have backwards ways of thinking. It's strange but interesting. I like it when games look into the unorthodox ways that people would cope and make civilizations to survive in a new world. Yara and Lev bring a breath of fresh air to the character roster. Lev is a young boy who naturally doesn't follow rules, and this has consequences. This gives him guilt that he struggles with for most of the game. It feels like he's a real person because his actions have actual consequences, just like a real person. Lev shaving his head results in him being hunted by his own people, which puts strain on his sister and makes his mother literally try and kill him. When he tries to go back to the Seraphites Island to save his mom, it results in the death of both his mother and sister. Lev had actual issues, unlike many of the other characters, that he had to work through during the game, and this made him one of the few characters that me and many other people actually cared about, and we actually cared if he survived each encounter. Yara is a very concerned older sister trying to care for her brother and make sure he isn't killed by their own people. Yara also faces her own trouble. Early on, her arm is injured and needs to be amputated. Even after she just lost her arm, she wastes no time following her brother when he runs off. This made me care and admire her character. She knew her family was more important than that injury, and it was not going to stop her from protecting Lev. So far, I've been fairly negative, but that doesn't really reflect my overall opinion of the game. I thoroughly enjoyed my time playing The Last of Us 2, and story and character gripes can't really change that. I think that the gameplay was a huge factor in my enjoyment, and has been stepped up immensely from the first game. Everything feels smoother and way more intuitive. In the first game, I kind of feel like stealth was just an aspect. It was just a side option that wasn't really made to be your main strategy. But in the second game, stealth isn't just an option, it's usually the best way to handle most situations. Being able to hide in grass and prone makes stealth much easier, but in a good way. In the first Last of Us, you would often just have to walk in open spaces from cover to cover and hope you weren't spotted. Also, I love how gameplay shifts from the first game. It makes sense that Ellie could crawl underneath spaces and hide in the grass, because she's much skinnier and more agile. Stealth isn't the only thing altered by the change of main character. Ellie can jump and dodge, things that weren't present at all in the first game. Jumping allows you to find new and interesting places in the much more open areas of the second game. Naturally, Ellie isn't as strong or durable as the tank that Joel was. So dodging gives a great way for Ellie to survive and win the same fights that Joel would have. Something about the combat and movement in this game just makes me feel good. I just kept coming back to it and will continue to do the same in the future. I think the gameplay is the highlight of the game. I love the AI. It is some of my favorite in recent years. Each soldier in Scar has a name, and when killed, their friends will shout the fallen soldier's name. It gives the enemies life, and it makes you feel like you're ending actual people's lives, which is, it makes you feel a little weird. It really contributes to the mental scarring Ellie has by the end of the game. Also, Last of Us 2 has a small aspect that I haven't really seen since the Batman Arkham games. The enemies have real terror. They know when their numbers dwindle, and they'll find their friends' bodies. The more paranoid the enemies get, the more they'll talk, check on each other, and they'll speak with a shaky and scared tone. It adds to the atmosphere and makes you feel unstoppable, which I don't know if it's a good thing. I think the way Ellie controls and how the AI reacts made this game a success to me. Gameplay wasn't really the only thing that changed in the second game. The environments you play in are wildly different from the first game. The first game was mostly linear with clear pathways of where you were supposed to go, with some open arenas where you fought. Last of Us 2 has larger, more open spaces, and even smaller places have multiple rooms where you can explore and find supplies. This adds a whole new element to the game because you can just miss items. This adds a whole new element to the game because you can just miss items. Things like the secondary weapon holsters and the tripwire bombs are completely optional, and you may not even find them. This encourages you to explore these intricately crafted areas, but allows you to leave them and move on at any point. My only problem is that when Ellie and Dina first get to Seattle, they must open a gate, and the only way to do this is with a paper that isn't very hidden. But if you aren't like me, who looks at every nook and cranny for supplies, you could miss the paper and be stuck at that part of the game. Other than that, I think that this game gets a good balance between linear and open world. Now, the ending. If you've been on YouTube and looked at anything Last of Us, you've probably seen 100 videos about the ending of this game. Many of them negative. And I didn't love the ending of the game. Sure, it made sense that she wouldn't kill Abby because she has realized that revenge is giving her nothing but trouble, and killing Abby will result in Lev's death. It also just doesn't make sense. Ellie goes through a lot throughout the story, not just physically but mentally, so having an ending where all those things weren't worth it, it just leaves a bad taste in the player's mouth. There really isn't anything satisfactory about the ending, because it just leaves you. Ellie pretty much has nothing at the end, Dina has left and she didn't get revenge. Now I'm just gonna put out a few closing thoughts. I didn't love the ending of this game. I didn't love the story of this game. But I did like this game. I had fun with it. I had a lot of fun with it. And I would play it again. And I would recommend that you would play it again. So, if you want a number out of 10, I'll give it a 6.5 or a 7, something like that. But I do encourage you to make your own opinion on this game, to play it for yourself, because sure, at an objective standpoint, the story isn't the best, and it definitely doesn't live up to the first game. But when you're playing it, it feels great, and I encourage you to try and find that same feeling from this game. Thanks for watching. Goodbye. Okay, so I'm recording this post-editing, and it's given me time to think about the game and think more on my opinions. Well, I don't think that that Last of Us 2 lived up to our expectations. I don't think it's a bad game at all. I don't think it's what we expected, but I don't think that makes it awful. I don't think that it lived up to the first game. But again, that doesn't make it awful. I think it's something else, and I think that the developers did what they wanted to. They wanted to show how confused and how Ellie would react when she is eventually left alone, like she said she feared. They wanted to explore that, and she's confused, she really is. She doesn't know if she can be like Joel, or if she's gonna be her own person, and you really see that. And thinking about it has given me a new respect for this game. And a lot of people, have hated on this game for just being a disappointment and for being bad. And I know a lot of the story choices are not very good, but I mean, the gameplay, the environments, some of those small character interactions, they can make up for it. And they do make up for it. So, while objectively, plot-wise, the game isn't the best, you need to think more than just base level. You need to think about, this is probably how Ellie would react when she's left alone, when her guardian, Joel, leaves her, and she's been afraid that that'll happen. You have to think, what would happen when someone who's terrified of being alone is left alone? They'll make choices, they'll try and be like their guardians, but eventually they'll find their own way, and that's what Ellie does. But doing that sacrifices a lot. Thank you for watching. See you in another video.